high performers are taking fish tank cleaner to reverse their age. So methylene blue at less than 3 milligrams per kilogram is an antioxidant. It helps with energy production. But greater than 3 milligrams, it becomes pro-oxidant. So instead of being an anti-inflammatory stimulus, neutralizing inflammatory loads, reactive oxygen species, it becomes pro-inflammatory itself.
All right, I'm here with board internal medicine physician certified in practice health optimization medicine. Man, that's a mouthful. And he's a specialist in hyperbaric oxygen therapy, known as HBOT, as well as the co-founder of Troscriptions TX, my main man, Dr. Scott Sherr. Welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, man. It's nice to be with you. Thanks for having me, Joel.
Yeah. Super excited to have you on. We were talking before, I've been getting a lot of questions about methylene blue, and I know you're an expert in that, as well as many other things. But I'm just curious. I'm always really curious kind of how people got started on their health journey and kind of, so maybe for you, I mean, you're such an eclectic doctor, and I'm just kind of curious your story of how you got there, but then also leading up to, why did you become so fascinated with methylene blue? I told you the only thing I know methylene blue does is it was used for fish tank cleaner. But now it's this superpower mitochondrial supplement. So I'm curious kind of like your health story of how you kind of got here, and then also how that now led to methylene blue.
Yeah, so if you lived before 1950, which many of us at this point have not, you would have heard of methylene blue, actually, because it was the first antimicrobial really available. It was found to be a treatment for malaria back in the 1890s. Before that, it was actually in the textile world. That's how it was invented. It's a synthesized drug, so it's not natural. That is true. And it was somehow figured out that it dyed your blue genes blue, but at the same time, it also treated malaria. And I don't know how that got from blue genes to malaria, to be honest. I still don't see like the sequitur there. It's
somebody was probably, it's like people eating paint or something. I'm sure somebody
was thinking something drug related, psychedelics. I mean, this is in South Africa, actually. This is where they figured this out. So it became the first drug registered with the FDA back in the 1890s. And then until the 1950s, it was really the main antimicrobial that was available. I mean, there were some other ones, but there was really no prescription antimicrobials into the 1950s.
Wow.
And so if you were in World War II in the Pacific Theater, you were taking methylene blue while you were in the jungles on the islands next to Japan and fighting the war, because it prevented fungal infections. And this is the dovetailing into the world of fish tank cleaner. And yes, methylene blue is used currently and has been for decades in fish tank cleaner. And the reason for this is because it's antifungal, it's antimicrobial. But the key to also remember is that methylene blue quality is really key. And in fish tank cleaner, for example, typically you're getting about 2% methylene blue, if maybe more than that, but just around 2% typically. And the methylene blue that's being used is either chemical or industrial grade. So you're poisoning your fish with lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, but it is an antifungal at the same time. So there you go. So
the fungi, you don't have, at least your tank is clean.
Your tank is clean, exactly.
Yeah.
So when it comes to using methylene blue therapeutically, there is a grade that's called USP grade. And USP grade is pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. And that's what we use in the products that we have at Troscriptions. But the challenge actually is that even USP methylene blue can also be contaminated. And a lot of the companies out there are either direct suppliers to the market, and they're using independent labs to test their product, which I don't trust, or they're product companies that are getting it from a lab that's giving them an independent lab certification, a certification of analysis or whatever. And we don't trust that either. So we do our own certifications after we get the product. And so we've gotten a lot of people that have told us over the last several years. So really, we were the first company to really come out with a product that used methylene blue. Methylene blue has been known about in the biohacking world for many, many years. However, there really weren't that many products out there until we came out with our products in 2020. So we came out with a stack of methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. This is called blue canatine. This is in February 2020.
By the way, I love blue canatine. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah, no, it definitely rocks. It's 3 to 5 hours of focus, getting shit done, verbal fluidity, productivity, energy, etc. Also seems to help with altitude. I think because it's got the nicotine and caffeine in there too, along with the methylene blue. And then we came out with our full methylene blue product, pure methylene blue, pharmaceutical grade. I call it beyond USP grade in June of 2020. And that was a request from people that didn't want a nicotine and caffeine infused product, and also for people that were looking at the news and seeing some of the research that was going on during the pandemic and were interested in using methylene blue as mitochondrial support. And so we were actually quite surprised at how popular methylene blue became and how quickly that actually kind of took off during that time. And now we have all these other companies out there that are making products in the methylene blue space, if you want to call it that. But our key really, and I've heard this from several people, is that our product is low dose, but seems to be more effective than a lot of the other products out there because, and I think this is just because we're testing it and we know the purity and the potency, and we're also using contract manufacturing with a compounding pharmacist involved. So we have everything precision dosed, pharmaceutical grade, and there's 4 docs in the team, including me, that really care about the stuff and test it all the time in clinical practice, test it on ourselves, test it with our patients in combination with the other therapies that we use. But you did ask me about my story. If you want me to go in there, I can go there before we can really dive into the methylene blue story. But the methylene blue story is very interesting, obviously, because it's been around for over 100 years. It's actually still on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications as well. And so you can get it prescribed as an antidote for something called methylhemoglobinemia, which is carbon monoxide poisoning, basically. And then also for cyanide poisoning. I don't recommend you try that one at home, but cyanide actually burns out the first couple of complexes of your mitochondria and they don't work, but methylene blue actually bypasses the first couple of complexes of your mitochondria, allowing you to still make energy even if those 2 complexes aren't working so well. So I'll let you be the player's choice. Take it from here.
Awesome. Based on what you just, I have so many questions now. So guess what? I don't even care how you got here, Scott.
I don't care either.
But we'll come back to that. I think what we'll do is we'll Tarantino this at the end and we'll do a backstory.
I love that. I love
one
that.
One of the things you said, though, I'm curious. Actually, I do want to highlight something you mentioned is that you have a team of doctors. There's 4 of you.
Yeah.
And I know Dr. Ted Awas. How do I say his last name?
Ted
Achacosko. He has a very solid reputation as well as you do. So you do have a really all-star team that is backing this and really like you guys carefully are doing this. And so people should know that you have a really solid team and that you guys care. And quality and importance of that, it's to the extreme. So I know that about all of you.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, you mentioned something in the 1950s, up into the 1950s, this was used as antifungal. I'm always curious, like, okay, so why did we stop? What happened along the way that now all of a sudden we only have some small players like you saying, hey, I think this is a really good thing?
It's a great question. And it comes down to the side effects of taking methylene blue. So methylene blue concentrates in urine. So it gets processed by the liver. It stays, actually, the interesting thing about methylene blue is that whether you get it IV, you do it in a buccal troche, which is our dissolvable lozenges that we have for your mouth, or if you swallow it, methylene blue is about 100% bioavailable, which means that almost all of it that you take is going to get into your body, which is pretty cool. There's very few drugs or supplements that you actually can make that claim. For example, I always give the alternative example of something like N-acetylcysteine, or NAC for short, NAC. That's about 10% bioavailable. Most supplements, when you take them orally, about between 5 and 20% bioavailable. Now you have like liposomals and things like that that might be a little bit higher on the bioavailability side, but in general, they're pretty low. But methylene blue...
Is that just in general because of our stomach acid breaking it down? Okay.
So stomach acid and also liver digestion. And so the liver itself is made to basically help process the things that we eat and drink or whatever. For the most part, what the liver does is deactivate or make them less bioavailable. So it decreases the activation of supplements. And so this is one of the reasons why at our company we make something called buccal troches, these dissolvable lozenges, these squares that go between your upper cheek and your gums, and dissolve there over about 15 to 30 minutes, because that bypasses your first pass metabolism, is what it's called, when the liver starts digesting things. And bypassing that helps you get more of that ingredient into your bloodstream faster. And also, being in the cheek here, there's 8 layers of mucosa up here, and that means it dissolves slowly enough that those ingredients get dissolved into that circulation in your brain, as opposed to being swallowed as if you just did like a sublingual drop or something like that. Those drops, there's only 1 layer of mucosa there, and it gets mostly just digested, to be honest. And so we used the methylene blue in the buccal troche form because we knew that we'd get to the brain faster. And so we decided on that route. But back to your original question, is why did it get out of favor, is because it concentrates in your urine and it makes your urine blue. and people didn't want their urine to be blue, I guess. And at very, very high doses, which we don't use at our company and are only really used in hospital settings, it also makes the additional beneficial side effect, if you want to call it, not really for people, is that your secretions will also turn slightly blue. So this is your tears as well. Your poop will also turn blue at very high doses. So
by the way, what's considered a high dose? Because I know your buccal if you it's a square shape for everybody to see, and that's a total of 16 milligrams in that square shape. So
exactly,
if I were to pop one, that's 16 milligrams. What's considered high dose?
That's a really good question. And this is the nuances of the world of methylene blue are really important now because you're getting a lot more information out there. And so classically, greater than 3 milligrams per kilogram is thought to be a high dose. And that's so if you're a 60 kilogram male or female, you're multiplying that by 3 milligrams, right? So it's 180 milligrams a day. So that's what's considered a high dose. Okay. But really
that's
what it comes
to troches I've got to have.
Yes, exactly. So we didn't formulate our product to be even on the higher end of the lower dose of the scale. And that would be between 1 and 3 milligrams typically. So 1 milligram per kilogram to 3 milligrams per kilogram is sort of the high end of the low dosed methylene blue scale. So what we do at Troscriptions is we use less than 1 milligram per kilogram because a lot of the data that's come out is that's really where the sweet spot is for mitochondrial optimization. The cool thing about methylene blue is it's called an electron cycler. So it helps donate electrons. What that means, it helps you make energy. And at the same time, it supports your antioxidant system by helping to pick up free electrons like reactive oxygen species and things like that. So as a result, it's giving you energy and resilience at the same time. But as you start getting it on the higher dose of the lower end of the scale, so 1 milligram per kilogram to 3, at that level, you still start getting potential complications to several aspects. One of them could be your biofilms. So we have these gastric biofilms that protect us, that we have these ecosystems in our intestines that keep our gut healthy. Those could be disrupted at that level. And also the half-life of methylene blue makes it a little like one of those things that you don't want to be taking every day if you're taking more than 1 milligram per kilogram per day. So in general, what we say is low dose is what we've described in our dosing, which is the cognitive optimization, the neurologic pathophysiology, like the people that are looking at in the neurologic world for methylene blue are using the dosing that we're using, somewhere between 8 milligrams to about 32 milligrams per day-ish. So for us, 16 milligrams was the sweet spot. And what we found is that really tends to be the sweet spot for most people, or even half that dose tends to be the sweet spot for a decent amount of people as well. So for like long story short, low dose methylene blue classically is less than 3 milligrams per kilogram, but the safest regular dosing of methylene blue is less than 1 milligram per kilogram because of the reasons I mentioned. The higher dosing also that you can take, if you do take higher dosing regularly, it also gives you a higher risk for having gastric ulceration and things like that. So you don't want to do that. So in my clinical practice, what I will do is I'll use intermittently higher dosed methylene blue, somewhere between the 1 and 3 milligram dosing, depending if there's an acute infection, if there's acute trauma, there's acute low oxygen states, because we know that methylene blue is very good cycling electrons, getting you more energy, helping you with antioxidant reserve. But if you're taking it more regularly for mitochondrial support and for mitochondrial dysfunction, it's really important to keep it at the lower dose of that scale. So that's why we have 16 milligram troches.
Awesome. Okay. I'm curious just on, because we're talking about dosage and stuff. You and I both have kids.
Yes.
Any and maybe you can't even say this because it's like, hey, I can't say and I get it. Everyone's the bio-individuality for kids, we know, but my boys saw me. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. Of course, they saw me with the troche one day. I want that. I was like, I can't give you this one because this one has nicotine in it. But if I had an actual methylene blue, just because you make a regular methylene blue, I was like, I would feel comfortable giving that to them. Maybe like a fourth of a square cut in half for both of them. But yeah, I'm just curious. For kids, if they wanted to do a little bit of this, and have you seen anecdotally, or even maybe there's something, I don't even know, written down, published studies of kids maybe learning behavior, any changes there?
So there's no studies in kids on the neurologic side. So the studies on neurologic optimization, performance enhancing are in adults, and they don't typically do a lot of studies on kids, as we know. So So what I can say is our company really only sells methylene blue to people over 18 years of age.
Yeah.
That being said, it is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications used for carbon monoxide poisoning and cyanide poisoning and things, and that can be used in children. So we do know that it's likely safe in kids, but we just don't recommend it as a company. We don't allow you to use it. And then, of course, the other people that shouldn't use methylene blue are pregnant women. So there's a potential risk for the fetus if you use methylene blue. And also in breastfeeding women. I've talked to breastfeeding women that are using methylene blue. I don't recommend it, but some people still do it, but I don't recommend it. And also, if you're taking any SSRI drugs, any medications that block serotonin reuptake, the reason for that is that methylene blue acts on the mitochondria, as I was describing before, but it also prevents the breakdown of several neurotransmitters. It's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And so what that means is that it helps increase the levels of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine in the body. And so a lot of people that I've worked with, actually on the elite athlete side, love the mood-enhancing qualities of methylene blue. So even the lower dosed methylene blue like we have still has that ability to give you that neurotransmitter release and make you feel that enhancement. And that's probably part of the reason why is a cognitive boost for people when they take methylene blue. Of course, you're also able to do more work and you feel the endurance push, the focus as well, because where do you have your most mitochondria? You have your most mitochondria in your brain, in your heart, in your liver, and your muscle tissue. So if you're doing a lot of cognitive work, you need more energy production capacity. Methylene blue is going to help you with that. If you're doing a lot of physical work, and that you need a lot of muscular activity, a lot of energy for that, and so methylene blue is going to help you there. So wherever you're actually using the most energy, that's where the mitochondria are the most active, and that's where your methylene blue is going to go. But in general, you don't want to take methylene blue if you're on SSRIs or drugs that block serotonin reuptake. You don't want to take it if you're pregnant, if you're breastfeeding. Kids is really an individual choice with a clinician and not something that we would recommend with our company specifically.
With women, I'm just curious because mitochondria is also highly dense in the ovaries. If women are looking to get pregnant, and they can't, we could just theorize that it might be a good thing also, methylene blue, right?
That's a really good question. I haven't really looked into the research on methylene blue and fertility. That's not something that's come up before, but I'm going to look into that now. I mean, you're right. The ovaries are highly metabolic. Obviously, sperm are as well with the amount of mitochondria that they have. So I don't know. You could do it as a partner. As if you're having a hard time.
I don't want any more kids, Dr.
No,
Scott.
not you and me. No, we're good. We're good. I'm talking about anybody listening or watching. Give it a go. It's still it's going to be fun. You kiss a Smurf, whatever.
Yes.
So, but you can have fun with that. But I don't see it being detrimental. That's for sure. We know that fertility rates have gone down dramatically, and a lot of that is related to mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's kind of the lowest common denominator for a lot of the work that we're doing and I'm doing clinically, is just understanding that most of us have mitochondrial dysfunction these days. You can test for it, which is good. So you could kind of get a good sense from people's like organic acid testing, for example, if you do that kind of work, that you can see what's going on in their mitochondria, at least looking at the markers from what we call metabolomic levels of real-time cellular processing and metabolites and things like that. So that's what I do in my clinical practice. But so I can get a sense of that, but you can kind of get a sense from people when they walk in the door, or as a coach, this already, Joel, you can kind of get a feel of how people are already doing cellularly just by giving them 5 minutes of your time, basically. So, and so then, that's how I think about methylene blue, as this fantastic mitochondrial support, and also as a mitochondrial optimizer going forward as well, for my elite athletes and for other people that are already doing a lot of the good foundational work and just want something else to give them additional edge, additional support, so they continue to do more and do what they want to do.
Yeah, it's going to make everything work better. That's for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things too, I read, and you already mentioned this, you alluded to it, but on your blog, you're talking about like methylene blue is, and you explained it beautifully already, it's that it's one of the most powerful antioxidants you can really have, because it is working not only in the mitochondria in a sense of the recycling of
electrons,
electrons
and energy,
but also it's also an antioxidant. So it's like you got two phases. And I just read Dr. John Lawrence's book on melatonin and had him on, And it was funny. He's basically saying the same thing about melatonin. So I'm like, all right, Dr. Scott, which one's better? I mean, maybe they're both great, right? But it's really interesting just because a couple of years ago or 5 years ago, glutathione was you got to get more glutathione. It's the master antioxidant. Now I'm talking to Dr. John Laurence and you guys are like, well, we got melatonin over here. It's way better than glutathione. And now I got methylene blue. But yeah, I'm just curious, anything you'd say to that or just?
Well, I think it's all in context, really. I think for me, the way I think about all these antioxidants is that you want to be sure to measure what people need, because you don't want to over antioxidize people too, because what happens with too much antioxidants is that you can actually become, so methylene blue is a good example of this. So methylene blue at the lower doses, greater than 3 milligrams, less than 3 milligrams per kilogram, is an antioxidant. It helps with energy production. But greater than 3 milligrams, it becomes pro-oxidant. So instead of being an anti-inflammatory stimulus, helping with neutralizing inflammatory loads, reactive oxygen species, it becomes pro-inflammatory itself. And so you have to be careful when you're looking at antioxidants that you don't do that. And the other reason why is you don't want to give so much antioxidant that your body stops producing it on its own. And so this is the classic scenario with glutathione, for example. So if you just push people's glutathione levels through the roof with support directly with glutathione, what you'll find is that their natural production of glutathione will go down. So the idea here is that you want to support the system to make more glutathione, so maybe giving something like N-acetylcysteine, for example. And N-acetylcysteine is going to give you the component amino acids that are required to make glutathione. There's also, it's unclear also if you take oral glutathione, if oral glutathione actually gets to your brain, because there's no actual glutathione transporters to get into your brain. And so that's another reason why NAC might be better. And then there's these other studies that just came out on longevity looking at NAC and glycine and other amino acids that might be helpful, because those can get directly into your brain and create these antioxidants and create the neurotransmitters, et cetera. So melatonin is an interesting one. I don't know as much about it as other people do. I do know that it's being used for its antioxidant capacity. I do worry about high-dose melatonin for long periods of time, because I do worry about the body's natural production of melatonin, just like I do with glutathione. So I think short-term, higher-dose methylene blue, like even the 1 milligram to 3 milligram per kilogram range, is reasonable, but only intermittently. And I think that's the same thing with melatonin most likely as well, because you don't want the body to see that for too long a period of time, because it could potentially downregulate the body's natural ability to make those kinds of things. So I always think about these things in context. John tends to be on the higher level of everything. Actually, he's a high methylene blue guy too. And I don't have a problem with high dose methylene blue, like I said, but you have to use it only intermittently. And you have to use it in the context of understanding that higher dose can potentially become pro-oxidant. It could become pro-inflammatory if you're taking it too often. But I have used high dose with my patients that have had chronic infections, and they've done well, because we know, for example, even at 50 milligrams twice daily, maybe even 25 milligrams twice daily, we know that the Lyme co-infection Bartonella is very sensitive to methylene blue in combination with other therapies specifically, and so you can use that to help actually break up some of the biofilms that particular organism can create. So that's why we get concerned, though, because that dosing is something that people, if they're using it chronically, can also disrupt natural and healthy biofilms as well. So I've always worked at sort of and this is what the company, that the Troscriptions company is all about, is that our real push is to stay as low dose as possible and create a synergistic effect with the types of ingredients that we're using. And so we have the pure methylene blue troche, just blue as it's called, and that's just methylene blue together, and that's a lower dose that's really focused on, as I've been describing, optimization of mitochondrial function, and not looking at it as a direct treatment for infections per se. You can use our troches at higher doses, so to do that for sure, and we have people that are using it in that capacity. And I think that is a great reason to use our troches, especially if you're using it in consultation with somebody that's helping you kind of with your overall strategy, whatever that might mean for you, if it's infection, for example. But lower doses seem to be more effective and most health optimizing, over the long term.
Yeah, love that. I'm curious what you have seen. I don't want to get banned. I'm tired of getting censored. I got censored the last 2 years, so I'm going to refer to it as the C virus. But I know a lot of biohackers and health guys like Ben Greenfield have talked about methylene blue, and it was probably a good, and you mentioned the WHO. The WHO actually said this is probably, I mean, I don't know for this virus specifically.
Not for this virus specifically.
Yeah. But, I mean, we already know based on what you just talked about, the antioxidant, but, you know, I just think because it's so prescient and on people's minds, anything anecdotal, or have there been any studies tying in the C virus and methylene blue and like, well, look, people recovered faster or got better, or, yeah, I'm just kind of curious.
I mean, there were certainly some case reports that were out there using methylene blue, and in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a really interesting cohort of people that were using higher dose methylene blue for cancer treatment, and none of them were getting COVID. This is back in France, back in like the early parts of the pandemic. And I worked with a lot of clinics over the last several years that have used methylene blue in combination with other therapies and seen some benefit. But as a company, we don't say that our product has any treatment effect for this particular virus. Although what I will say in the long haul COVID world, that one of the main things that's happening here is that people have mitochondrial dysfunction. And so as a result of having mitochondrial dysfunction, your brain won't work. You will get brain fog. You will have a difficult time concentrating and focusing. And so if you give your mitochondria more energy capacity in your brain, you are going to see your brain turn back on. And so I often will parlay that question into a mitochondrial dysfunction question, because that's truly what we're seeing, is that people with brain fog, people with fatigue, people with decreased ability to concentrate and with attention span issues that didn't have these before and have them now. Oftentimes these are signs of mitochondrial dysfunction, no matter how it got there, whether it was infection, inflammation, autoimmunity. It doesn't seem to matter, because the lowest common denominator is your mitochondrial function. And so, and the other benefit is that if the first two complexes aren't working well, but the methylene blue itself can bypass those, help you still create more energy, and as a result, at least try to make up for the problems with those first two complexes while you're trying to fix them. So the first two complexes are really important, because those are the first two that get electrons donated to them by your Krebs cycle, by your citric acid cycle in your mitochondria. And so that's your NAD and your FAD. And if those aren't working, you can't make energy, because you can't float electrons through, and you can't make a proton gradient and all those kinds of things. So, and long story short is that you can make up for that, because methylene blue revs up cytochrome oxidase, which is your complex 4.
Yeah.
By the way, also what revs up complex 4 is low-level light therapy. Red light therapy does the same. And so that's why there's been some interesting work that's being done in the Alzheimer's literature. And there's a guy named Francisco Gonzalez Lima who's done some work combining red light therapy, 660 nanometers, along with methylene blue, because they're synergistic. At lower doses, they're both going to help with mitochondrial performance, and at the low dose methylene blue plus red light, and then higher doses of methylene blue and red light seem to be antimicrobial as well. So very interesting stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Alzheimer's, because I know there's some research suggesting that it's going to help with that, as when you already mentioned with cancer and Lyme. So that's really neat to hear. And I was also going to ask, about if there was any way you would recommend to get the most. As biohackers, we always like to stack our hacks. And so would you do methylene blue and HBOT? Would you do methylene blue and like red light therapy? I know we'll eventually start talking about a little bit about HBOT, because I do want to, you're an expert there too. But I was just curious. Yeah.
So good questions. I mean, so in the Alzheimer's literature, it's really exciting, because the researcher, his name, Francisco Gonzalez Lima, he's at the University of Texas, Austin. And if people are interested, he's done a number of podcasts on methylene blue and the potential. He's written a number of papers looking at the potential of this particular compound to reverse or to prevent Alzheimer's disease. And the reason why is the reasons why are all the ones that we've been talking about so far. We think that his theory is that Alzheimer's is a blood flow issue. And so what you do with methylene blue is that you increase blood flow. You do that because when you get your mitochondria to work harder, to work more, to make more energy, that's going to give the cells in that area a stimulus to create increased nitric oxide release. And then nitric oxide is going to cause more blood flow to that particular area of the brain. As a result of having more blood flow to that brain area, you're going to get more energy production. And then hopefully as a result of that, you're going to see more of the ability to have cognitive potential, or more cognitive ability in that area, or whatever that corresponds to. So At the lower doses, it's a nitric oxide releaser. At the higher doses, even greater than 1 milligram per kilogram, it may have the opposite effect. So that's why it's important to also keep your dosing very low when you're thinking about cognitive performance. And so when it comes to Alzheimer's, that we're very excited about that research. The dosing that we use at Troscriptions is based on some of the drugs that are being studied right now for Alzheimer's that are based on methylene blue as its main ingredient. And so, again, we don't make any claims that our particular product treats Alzheimer's or anything like that. Again, we're treating mitochondrial dysfunction and mitochondrial optimization, giving your mitochondria some love. That's what we like to say. But to your other point about what we're using this in combination with, I think the one that we're most excited about is the one that I discussed and that you also kind of hammered in there, which is light therapy, red light therapy. So what we've noticed from early on is that if you combine methylene blue with red light, so I have my light over here, for example, and so that's kind of my morning routine, and the red light itself seems to activate your mitochondria. We know this happens, along with the methylene blue also doing the same thing. It seems to be synergistic. Nice. And if you don't have a red light panel, you can also get the same exposure by going out in the sunlight, because obviously sunlight has red light. So it takes about, if you use one of our troches and dissolve them in your mouth, it takes about 30 minutes or so for it to dissolve in your system. So usually take your troche, 30 minutes later, get out in the sun or get in front of your red light panels is the kind of thing we would recommend for the most part. So, and then in combination with other things, it's a really interesting question. So when it comes down to brain function, your brain obviously requires lots of energy. And so one of the things that I've been experimenting with is in people that are doing brain training and neurofeedback and things like that, if you can give them a little bit of methylene blue before their brain training and neurofeedback, they seem to work, they seem to have better outcomes, they seem to do better and seem to perform faster and make better gains and faster gains that way. We're also looking at it in combination with exercise. And so people that are looking at endurance-related exercise, we think that methylene blue helps with the endurance piece because it's giving you more energy capacity in your mitochondria. And so that's also interesting. And then we're also looking at methylene blue for jet lag specifically because, again, when you're on an airplane, most people know this, I think, but you're pressurized to between 6,000 and 8,000 feet above sea level. And so that means you're getting less oxygen up there. So you have less oxygen available, you have less energy potential, but you have more methylene blue around. So that's giving you some antioxidant reserve, and it's also giving you some energy upgrades at the same time. So you're potentially preventing jet lag, at least a little bit. Of course, if you're changing time zones and things like that, there is that issue. But because methylene blue can act pretty much just like oxygen as a result of accepting electrons, there's a way to maintain energy production regardless of the altitude. So we're working on some protocols there, which are super interesting. And of course, yes, you mentioned methylene blue and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And so I do specialize in that field, and I work with people using an integrative approach. And one of the things that I always like to think about is how well optimized are they to get into a hyperbaric chamber? And what we're doing in there is increasing the amount of energy you're producing. If you can't make energy effectively, if you don't have the capacity to make it from a machinery perspective, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, et cetera, and also on the other end of it, you don't have the ability to detoxify, to create an antioxidant reserve that balances out the amount of energy you've just made in the chamber, that can also get you in trouble. So if I have people that are compromised, then I like to think about using methylene blue before they go in. If they're not compromised, then something that I'll give them maybe an hour or so after their hyperbaric chamber. That's something that I'll also do after exercise, about an hour afterwards as well. So you're allowing them to create the hormetic stress of being in that environment, and then you're giving them some antioxidant support after.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just kind of curious, and I don't believe in making any claims, obviously, about this but I'm just curious because you just mentioned Alzheimer's, and I always think of Alzheimer's as kind of like type 3 diabetes. A lot of practitioners are talking about that and just being a metabolic issue, metabolic health issue. I'm curious, and if you're talking about it can increase nitric oxide, could methylene blue also help with, I don't know, diabetes and weight loss? And because I work with a lot of metabolic health clients and weight loss issues. And of course, I know like you can't take this and you expect to lose weight, but I'm just thinking like, would you be willing to hypothesize that, hey, this could help with things like blood sugar dysregulation and diabetes? Because I know I talked to Dr. Nathan Bryan, and he's a nitric oxide guy, and he kind of talks about how NO, if you can't produce NO, there's no way, or if you have less NO, you're gonna have problems with inflammation and circulation. And so those are two big drivers for mitochondrial dysfunction. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's all really interesting. My sense of it is that what methylene blue is doing is revving up metabolism. It's increasing oxygen consumption, and then as a result of that, it's making more energy, and then you're having more blood vessel dilation. And so we have had people report that their blood sugars do go down a little bit. There hasn't really been a lot of literature on what the exact glycemic effect of methylene blue is, but in general, it's revving up metabolism, so you're going to burn through more glucose, and as a result of that, you are going to have a blood sugar that seems to potentially be more regulated. And you mentioned Alzheimer's and type 3 diabetes, and I think that's very interesting. And there's a school of thought that certainly one way we can get Alzheimer's, I think what it's coming down to, at least in the work that I do and understand, is that Alzheimer's is an end process. It's an end process, probably of several different mechanisms, at least if not just one or two. Type 3 diabetes or insulin resistance being a big one of those, but infection is probably a big one for people too. These are in people that have had chronic infections for long periods of time, like the Lyme co-infections, for example, mold, other kinds of things that can potentially also contribute to the production of these amyloid plaques, which we thought initially were related to the Alzheimer's itself, but it actually seems to be that these are just reactive things that are happening to the brain to try to protect itself from whatever is going on, whether it be sugar, inflammation, genetic issues, infection, etc. So I think where methylene blue would potentially shine here is that it's helping with mitochondrial function, again, while it's also helping with blood flow. So I think used in the context of as I always do, an integrative strategy. It's not just here, take methylene blue and call me in the morning.
100%.
It's okay. What are we doing in your diet? What are we doing for the lifestyle? What are we checking on infection? Are we checking on mitochondrial markers? And it's all important to do. And then, of course, changing all the lifestyle kinds of things along the way. So if you're doing that in a larger context, I think absolutely methylene blue is a supportive compound, and it's going to help with mitochondrial function. So I'm using it in all those capacities. I have people that have metabolic dysfunction. I'm using it for sure.
Yeah.
The only thing you have to think about here is that in some people that are really chronically inflamed and have chronic infections, you have to start off at very, very low dosing, because even though we're giving mitochondrial support, we're also increasing energy production at the same time. And so it could be that your complex 3 and complex 4 of your electron transport chain aren't working so well. And if that's the case, methylene blue is also potentially going to cause an issue, because you won't be able to make the energy with the methylene blue that you have. It could become more oxidative, even at lower doses. And so that's why it's really important to test for these kinds of things, and to make sure you if you have somebody in front of you that's quite sick overall, you want to start off with low dosing and titrate it as you go, rather than starting off like a full troche or something like that.
Awesome stuff. You brought up an interesting point. I wanted to ask you this because when we were on when I saw you recently at the recent Upgrade Labs conference, we were talking about methylene blue, and I was mentioning another practitioner, and you're like, oh my God, like this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They should stay in like their wheelhouse, right? So actually I want to ask you, what do you think, and some of these people are very well known in the health space, and they're on social media, and they're pontificating, and I think, overall they're trying to do a good job, but they probably get things wrong. So what are maybe people getting wrong about methylene blue? I mean, what do you think is like the biggest thing?
I think the biggest thing is the dosing. The biggest thing is the dosing, and also that they're getting high quality methylene blue. That's my major concern.
Gotcha.
And the third piece with it would be that the methylene blue that comes in droppers is very difficult to dose, and it gets everywhere. So it's not something that I've had a lot of good experience with prior to our company developing this product. It's just hard for people, unless they're really good at chemistry, to be able to like do this and not make a mess and dye everything blue. Because the thing about methylene blue is that it will dye your kitchen sink blue, I promise you, and it will not come out. And so unless you have like scrubbing kinds of things, so it's like not easy to do. So I think those are the three pieces. So the low dose we've already described. I think that the dosing out there that's being discussed is probably too high for most people. I'm just worried that anything above, we say our dosing is, we don't want anybody taking more than 4 full troches per day. And even that is probably on the higher dose. That's about 1.5 milligrams per kilogram. Would that be that dosing if you did 16 times 4 kind of thing? So I think that's the first thing, is that dosing is key. Lower dosing is likely better than higher dosing. It's kind of one of those things. It's like more is not always better.
Yeah.
And then
love that.
the other thing is that with the dosing is that people are not delineating between taking higher dosing intermittently, like once a month or something like that, versus taking higher dosing regularly, like several times a week, because that potentially can build up in the system and become more pro-oxidative. So those are the major things on the lower dosing side. And when it comes to obviously the form factor, that's a big deal. We have a troche that makes it very easy for people to either put in their mouth and let it dissolve. And our Just Blue, our pure methylene blue troche, can also be swallowed as well. And so if you don't want your mouth to be blue, that's okay. You can just swallow it as long as it's on an empty stomach. It seems to be as effective for most people. The only caveat to that is if you have a lot of brain fog, if you have a lot of concentration issues, then potentially using it as something in your mouth would be better. That's what I found with the people that I've worked with. And then you can shine your light up your nose and you're on your face or whatever, and help activate it. So that's what if you have a nasal light or something like that. I don't have one, but I have clients that use the nasal lights for frontal lobe activation and nitric oxide release, et cetera, with the red light therapy. So I think those would be the main ones. And I talk to some of these people and I have conversations with them. And my goal really is to educate. I mean, this is
totally.
Methylene blue has not been in the purvey of the world in the online social media wellness community for very long, and so it's
and
still
you know how it is,
are,
Dr. Scott. People hear about something like I told you. I heard about methylene blue probably about 2 years ago, and I'm like, but it's also a fish tank cleaner. But biohackers are like, we're taking it. I'm like, I'll wait a couple of years till I kind of hear a little bit more about this. And here you are. You guys created a company, so now here we are. So now, I agree, man. I mean, sometimes like the whole more is better. Like, I'm just gonna hack myself. Like, I don't know. Yeah,
there were some great headlines about a year ago. It was great. It was a biohackers or high performers are taking fish tank cleaner to reverse their age, and so that was about our products. And this is it was great because it was a perfect clickbait headline. It was perfectly what you said. Oh, this is just fish tank cleaner. But again, delineating quality, delineating dosage, delineating form factor, those were obviously not part of that conversation or those articles. It was all about just trying to grab eyeballs, and it worked well. People grabbed eyeballs, and it worked.
Sales went up.
Yeah, it did actually. Sales did go up after that. So I don't have a problem with it. But we got into the world of methylene blue because we saw the research that was coming out. We saw the potential of this compound that had been around, and the safety is well known for over 100 years. And it's one of those compounds that it's got so much utility in so many different types of situations. And so that's why we really started using it. And then the other corollary to this was that what it came down to is that we wanted to change the definitions of what a nootropic was. Most people think of nootropics as cognitive enhancers, performance enhancers, but the category is quite large. And so what we did is we delineated it between two different categories, and then we added a third even. The first category is what we call a health optimization nootropic. These are nootropics that support the system, that help the brain function better, but they don't clock the system. So they support the system. So a good example of this, or two examples, would be the amino acid L-tyrosine, which makes some of your neurotransmitters. You take L-tyrosine, it's going to support your brain's function because it's going to give you your neurotransmitters, your dopamine, norepinephrine. If you take CBD, cannabidiol, I was going to say cannabidiol, that's CBG, that's our other product. Anyway, so CBD actually helps with neurotransmitter balance in your brain with the endocannabinoid system. So that's also a health optimization nootropic. Then you have something like Adderall or racetams or even caffeine and nicotine. This falls into the category of what we call performance optimization nootropics. Performance optimization nootropics make your brain more fit for a task, but they do not make your brain potentially healthy in the process. So stimulants are going to stimulate the system, and caffeine and nicotine are stimulants. Adderall is an amphetamine. It's going to stimulate more neurotransmitter release. So, but then there's methylene blue, and methylene blue actually falls into both categories. It supports the system by helping with antioxidant reserve, but it also enhances the system by neurotransmitter release and energy production. So we created a new category for this called the blue tropic. So it's blue, obviously because it's methylene blue, and tropic because it's affecting and enhancing brain function. So we have the pure 16 milligram just blue, methylene blue troche, and then we also have our blue tropic stack, which is our stack with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. So you get that stimulant effect, you get that focus, concentration, productivity bump for 3 to 5 hours, but you're also being supported because methylene blue is supporting your system, CBD is supporting your system, both as CBD is a health optimization nootropic and methylene blue is as well. It's just got that combination effect. So when we looked at all this, we wanted to use methylene blue in those contexts, but also be able to use in clinical practice. And so we wanted to be able to have our patients be able to use this compound easily, as opposed to like dropping it in liquid and having it in a powder and getting it all over the place and not knowing your dosing, potentially overdosing, et cetera, et cetera.
Love that. And yeah, the canatine, the blue canatine, the nootropic is my favorite. I just feel in a flow, and I don't know, maybe it's also just psychological because you get to put it in your mouth, and then it's the placebo. You think you're putting it in, and then the tongue is blue. So maybe it's that, but I do feel good on it. I feel just more productive and more kind of in a flow. So that's what I've been enjoying about it.
Yeah, and it's very low dose everything. Low dose nicotine, It's only 1 milligram in a full troche. Most people only take a half of a troche as their dose. I'm a quarter kind of guy because I'm not a caffeine person. There is I love caffeine. I just don't drink it anymore as much as I used to. So getting older, but it only has 50 milligrams of caffeine in it in a full troche. That's 1/4 cup of coffee equivalent. And so you have a 1/4 cup of coffee, 1 milligram of nicotine. And just to give a perspective, in a cigarette or in a vaping product, you're talking like 6 to 26 milligrams of nicotine in a cigarette. And
wow.
the difference,
cigarette.
Just one cigarette. Yeah. And the difference also with nicotine is that if you smoke it or vape it, it can be addictive. But if you let it dissolve in your mouth slowly over 15 to 30 minutes, very, very rare that would be the case, especially at the low dosing that we're using. And it's also non-tobacco derived as well. So we don't have to worry about any of that tobacco stuff anyway. But so we have the nicotine and caffeine there, very low dose. Methylene blue is only 5 milligrams. And then you have CBD, which is 5 milligrams, helping round the whole thing out. So
love it.
If you're taking any of those compounds by themselves, you're likely taking a higher dose of those things. And so the key for us was low dose synergistic approach. And that's with our other product that we haven't discussed, our Trocom,
which is just going to bring that up. Beautiful. Yeah. And I wanted to actually know why you decided to even, you've got so-called stimulants. It's not a stimulant, but you've got these enhancers, these mitochondria. And I'm curious, like, what made you guys decide, hey, we need to also focus on the calming aspect and bringing things down. And then also, why kava? I love kava, by the way. There's a kava bar out here in Idaho that I've been going to regularly and stacking up. Kava, by the way, has replaced my wine habit. I used to drink red wine regularly. Good, clean wine, like the Dry Farms. But I kind of just realized I was probably drinking just too much. And kava I've completely fell in love with just drinking kava, and it's completely changed. I don't drink the red wine like nearly as much now. So yeah, but curious to you and why you guys came up with that third product and why kava.
So it all comes back for us to a mission, and the mission is really based on a nonprofit organization that we started before Troscriptions. And the nonprofit organization is called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And this is an organization that is training doctors and practitioners on how to optimize health rather than treat disease. And it's a 7-module certification that was developed by my colleague, Dr. Ted Atracoso. Dr. Ted, also the founder of Troscriptions as well. He developed in his own clinical practice over many years. And the idea with optimizing your health is that it takes time, and that as you are optimizing, you have these immediate needs to feel better now. One of those is mitochondrial function. Another is brain function specifically. And of course, ways to relax and de-stress and have something that can anti-stress you and anti-anxiousness you very quickly is what we really were driving at with this particular product called Trocom. And the idea was, if you need something now on demand to relax you, Trocom will help you do that. And it's a combination, as you said, of kava, of CBD, of CBG, which is another non-psychoactive cannabinoid. And it's the one I was trying to say earlier when I was trying to say CBD. It's called cannabigerol. And then the final ingredient is a very permeable form of GABA that's attached to a vitamin B3 called nicotinyl GABA. And so GABA supplementation is pretty shitty because most of that we talked about bioavailability. GABA bioavailability, if you take it orally, is like almost zero. So I don't recommend taking GABA by itself. But nicotinyl GABA, when it's attached to a vitamin B3, is highly blood-brain barrier permeable. It will get into your bloodstream. It will get to your brain. And kava, you already discussed, kava also works on the GABA system. And so kava is a great way to help modulate your GABA system and help increase the GABA tone. And so you get more relaxation, stress reduction. CBD also helps in a different way. It helps with increasing something called anandamide, which is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for making us feel blissful. We often used to think that endorphins were the reason why you felt good after exercise, but we think it's actually anandamide, and the production of anandamide is actually doing most of that heavy lifting to make you feel good. So anandamide is very important. It gives you bliss feelings. CBD is also protective, and CBG, cannabigerol, it's a newer cannabinoid. It's a very small amount of the cannabis plant. Again, it's non-psychoactive, but it helps with temperature regulation, it helps with pain sensation. It also helps with working with glucose metabolism, interestingly enough. And it seems to work on various other pathways, including the endocannabinoid system, to help with relaxation and stress reduction, as well as pain. So it's a very exciting cannabinoid, and it's being used in some sleep formulations as well with CBN. You'll see those on the market as well. So we decided that we wanted to make something that could work right now. And then again, all of our troches are titratable. So you could start off with just a quarter of one or a half or a full. So if I was really nervous for our podcast today, Joel, I could have taken like a quarter.
I do that to you. Yeah, I intimidate you.
I didn't do it. I didn't. Yeah. I know you too well. I was like, I don't think he's going to intimidate me with hard questions. But so for some of the podcasts that I've done, but not commonly, but so if I get stressed, or if I work with people that are super stressed, you know what happens when you get super stressed? Like your brain shuts off, right? You forget your lines. If you're an actor, you have dreams of being in front of people without any clothes on, those kinds of things. You like in front of people and you forget what you were supposed to say because your brain is so sympathetically dominant. You're such in fight or flight that your mind goes blank. But if you can just take down that notch just a little bit, then your brain's going to come back online. And so that's what happens with Trocom at like a quarter dose for me and for a lot of people that I work with. And then a half of a dose, that's actually really great for winding down at the end of the evening or the end of the day. It can replace your glass of alcohol or two. And that's another way just to kind of chill out. It's got the kava in there like you were discussing before. So we call it our no dependence, no withdrawal, no tolerance alcohol equivalent. So that's a good thing. Alcohol is probably one of the worst drugs ever as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I still work part-time in the hospital, and I see liver failure, cirrhosis, complications of alcohol every single day I work there, and it's just terrible. Wow. You don't see that with kava. Some of the issues that they thought were happening with liver issues are not issues at all. When it comes to kava, there were some questions about potential liver toxicity when it comes to kava, but there really is no evidence of that. CBD and CBG do not have any toxicity. And then GABA is great. Of course, you do have to also consider what other drugs you might be taking in combination with any GABA supplementation. That would include alcohol. That would include benzodiazepine. So you don't want to be on your benzos or your drinking while you're taking other drugs that enhance GABA, because that could be deadly. It could be really not something you want to do. So, but in general, anti-anxiousness, anti-stress, that's what this formula was created for. And it can be titrated depending on how much you need.
Love it. And I mean, let's face it, the last 2 years, no one's been stressed. I mean,
no, zero people. I think the prescription rates for benzos went up about 20% the first 6 months of the pandemic. Wow. And they haven't come down very much.
Makes sense. I mean, I'm sure there's some addictive factor there too, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the addictive overdose deaths, opiate, alcohol, all of that stuff went up in the first several months during the pandemic, obviously. I mean, for obvious reasons. And I was seeing this in real time, which was quite sad. And unfortunately, we're dealing with that. So, but most people don't want to be on those drugs. Most people don't want to have that as a way that they need to relax. And of course, it's not just about taking any supplement. It's not just about taking Trocom as a formula or any other supplement to help you relax. It's about doing the hard work or the more sustainable work of working with a practitioner, optimizing your levels of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and hormones, starting a meditation practice, getting cold, breathing, getting hot, rolling around on the floor with your kids and playing around, and doing things that we know are as good as antidepressants, right? We know that exercise is just as good if people will do it. We know cold is likely just as good if people will do it. Yeah. And heat is the same thing. So what it comes down to for me and for my company is that we make formulas that we think are fantastically effective. But of course, we want you to be thinking about what you're doing for your health overall. And that's what the nonprofit is all about. That's what my practice is all about. That's what I talk about with hyperbaric therapy. It's not just about getting into a chamber. It's about what are you doing before, during, and after to truly optimize that experience so that you don't need to go in all the time. That most people don't have the access to it all the time. And that's okay.
Totally.
You shouldn't need it if you're doing the daily kinds of things to truly optimize.
100%. We are in so much in alignment with that. Again, you have a great supplement company and a great line, but I always tell
Formulas,
people thank you.
Yes.
And I always tell people you're not going to hack your way out of it. I love hacks. I call my show The Hacked Life. You will never hack your way out of some serious illness. Like taking Trocom is not going to do it. You have to have systems and protocols in place. This could be one of the hacks, let's just say, for better or for worse, to help get you there, but it's not going to be that will not get you, rid of your, chronic anxiety or panic attacks for your entire life.
But if it helps you in the short term, then that's what it's for. And
100%.
And then if it can help you do the more sustainable work, the more daily work to really start moving that needle, then I'd be happy for people to not use our products if they don't need them. When it comes to methylene blue, I think that for most people, given the world we live in, some mitochondrial support is a good idea. And having Trocom in a pinch, I use it for me if you get those ruminating, perseverating thoughts at night that won't let you go to bed, or that song that won't get out of your head. This is a great way I get those earworms all the time. Those are the worst. But Trocom is really great because it shuts down your mind. It lets you relax. And so I'm doing the work every day. I'm meditating. I use my sauna. I have my chamber, all those kinds of things. But still, I need these things on occasion, and I use them as I need to. But methylene blue is my tried and true daily health optimization supplement. It's like my multivitamin that I've obviously personalized to my needs, by the way, not just your regular multivitamin at Costco or something, but like my multivitamins or the vitamins I take every day, methylene blue is part of that because it's giving that mitochondrial support.
Love it. I'm looking at the time. We're not going to have a lot of time to talk about HBOT, which I do, though, want to talk about. I just had one thing, though, I did want to ask you about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. When you look at all the hacks out there, is this like the number one hack? Do you think, like, if you had to invest in a technology that is, what I usually tell people, actually, I think is sauna, a good sauna, because you get detox effects and the red light, and it just can do so much for the price and stuff. Right. I think that's probably your number one bang for your buck biohack. But I know there was a study that came out maybe a couple of years ago now, showing how hyperbaric oxygen increases your telomeres, and you want to reverse aging, this is it. So I was like, man, that's some pretty, some of these chambers, and I know you have your HBOT Plus company, correct?
Yep.
That makes really nice looking HBOT chambers for your home. And, some of these things range from $15,000 a little bit more. But if you have the money, I think, man, that's probably one of the pound for pound biohacks you could probably get other than a sauna.
Yeah, so my company, OneBase, it's called OneBase Health now. It used to be called HBOT Plus, but we go by both names. Okay. My company, I started to really try to create more software, more education, more understanding of how these chambers could potentially help you, whether you had a mild unit at your house, a medical grade unit at your house, which people do these days, or you were going to a facility and getting hyperbaric therapy. And the idea really is that the chambers themselves, we really are trying to trick out with hacks is what it comes down to. And I trick it out with before, during, and after kinds of hacks, depending on what's there. But I don't think you're wrong in saying that oxygen's pretty goddamn fundamental, right? And I think that what we don't realize is that most of us are having issues with producing energy on a regular basis. And so using a chamber regularly can potentially be helpful as a way to do reverse a lot of the damage that we're doing on a daily basis is what it comes down to. So I don't think it's going to happen now, but I think in the next 3 to 5 years, optimistically, what you're going to see is that more people are going to have these things at their homes. It's going to be like having a Peloton and being on a payment plan and taking classes. And so I'm working on a couple models like that, but I do have the ability with my company to get some demo chambers out there for people interested in our technology and what we're doing. And then the context of always looking at things in this integrative way. And that's how I operate. And so I'm going to announce it now because that means I'm actually going to have to finish my book on this particular subject, because I've been working on a book for many years, for a couple of years now, on hyperbaric therapy. And it's always like the way I think I'm probably going to start it is that like this book is about hyperbaric therapy, but even if you never get into a chamber, everything in here is going to help you, whether you decide to use the hyperbaric protocols or not, because the idea, again, is not just about getting into a chamber. And that's not that's easy, true, because you just sit in there, relax or whatever. You can make it more active sometimes too by bringing in certain things depending on the chamber, and we can have fun with that. But in essence, if you're optimizing your health, you're using some of these other technologies, some of the things are less expensive, a lot of things are less expensive. Yeah. You can see a lot of great benefit, sustainably so, especially if you're looking at foundational health markers, and that's what the health optimization medicine piece is for me, that foundational practice. So there you go. I announced it. This is the first time I've said it publicly ever, because I've been I didn't want to have to actually do it. No, I do want to actually finish.
I'm with you, man. Writing a book is a task. I'm actually writing one right now. And,
sweet.
I have a great coach, and I could recommend him to you if you feel like you need it. But I just know, for me, having a coach and having someone hold me accountable, and I'll kind of, this too, having a coach in anything you do, having someone just kind of guide you through the process and keep you accountable and make sure you're hitting the certain spots has helped me tremendously. I went from like sometimes I'll write it, and then to like, dude, you got to be, we got to be here by this time. Okay. So that's helped me out a lot. But I'm excited, man. I'm really excited for your book, because I'm looking at the time. We're not going to have time to even go to HBOT. So I'm going to bring you back on, and we'll talk all about HBOT.
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
Comes out. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the advice. I appreciate that. I might take you up on the coaching. We'll see. It's one of those things. It's what do they call it? They call it a project that's dear to your heart. It's like a personal project that I haven't been writing it for other people. I've been writing it for me, and I hope other people will benefit from it. So, but yeah, I'm happy to come back on. We can talk more about it.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah.
All right, let's, if you don't mind, well, before I jump into some lightning round questions, we'll wrap it up. Anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
No, we did a great job talking about methylene blue, man. I appreciate the questions and diving deep into the nuances there.
Yeah, man. Appreciate that. All right. Now, some of these questions might have a little Tarantino effect, like I mentioned.
I love it.
So I'm curious, what are some choices, or maybe just a choice that you made that you think made you who you are today?
That's a good question. What comes to mind is that I had an opportunity to work for a large player in the biohacking world and do a lot of direct work in the clinic in that setting back in 2015, 2016. And I decided against it. And it was probably one of the better decisions that I've ever made, because it opened up a lot of other worlds for me. The whole world of health optimization medicine, the nonprofit, the Troscriptions company. None of that would have likely happened if I hadn't made that decision. So that was probably a big inflection point for me, like the summer of 2016, I would say. Yeah, that's when I decided I was going to start fasting. I did my first ketogenic diet thing. I did a lot of different things that year to really start realizing, and I think you've probably gotten through this, Joel, at some point. It's like you can only get so far intellectually. You have to decide to start doing things a little bit differently, and that's what I decided to do that year.
Yeah, so cool. I'm curious, man. You and your team, you guys are such a force in the health and wellness world. Who inspires you?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people do, but I think probably the two most. I mean, it's always hard to kind of have this. I think Dr. Ted Achacoso, the founder of our teams, he's just a really brilliant guy, really smart guy. He's got an IQ and an EQ that probably are matched, which is ridiculous on both sides. And so he's also taught me a lot about meditation. He's a Dzogchen practitioner, so I've learned a lot about that. And so I think that's been great. I mean, of course, growing up the father of a chiropractor and being in the health and wellness space and being a healer, that was really important for me as well. So probably my two biggest influences would be those two guys in my life. So
yeah, really cool what you hear about Dr. Ted. I've heard that from just so many people. They just talk about him in such high regard and his just intelligence in both spheres. So that's really cool. I'm a big reader. I used to have my bookcases right here. You can't see it, but I used to do my podcast facing the bookcase. Any books that you would recommend? Is there like a top 1 to 3 that had a huge impact on your life and that you'd recommend other people read?
Yeah, this is always a good question. Looking at my shelf right now, what I have down here. I'm always interested in things that sort of cross-pollinate outside of my field. And so I've read a lot of books when I was younger even on what was it called, like economic kinds of books, but like more for like lay press. And then I also did a decent amount with understanding habits. There's a great book by Charles Duhigg that I love that I would always recommend to people, The Power of Habit. And so that's one of the ones that I always kind of come back to as well. Right now I'm looking at I'm reading a book by Ray Dalio, one about the economy, which I'm really enjoying. So I go around and do different types of things these days. And so, but I think the one that would kind of hit me the most typically, there's another book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. This is one that was recommended to me by Dr. Ted several years ago. It's a book that was written in the 1980s, and it's about consciousness and vibration, and very, very cool. And for people that like this kinds of stuff, like those kinds of things, like it's a fantastic book. It's a hard book to read. You have to read it a couple times to really understand it, but it's great. It's great. I would highly recommend it.
That's awesome. I've never heard of that book, and I'm big into that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll check that one out.
Yeah.
Last two questions, we'll wrap it up. Any rituals or hacks or practices that you like to do on a regular basis?
Yeah, for me, it's usually meditation's a big one. So certainly several times during the day where I try to meditate. Is
there a type that you gravitate to more than other?
So I use the work that I've mostly been focused on doing is based on the Dzogchen kind of philosophy of Buddhism, also known as the Great Perfection. And the idea is that you can meditate anytime. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in cross-legged position and putting your hands up to the sky. That's not meditation really for most people, but I do some of that as well. But it's a practice. Sometimes they're guided meditation. Sometimes there's just some background music. It depends on what it is. But the meditation practice is typically 2 to 3 times a day, depending on the day, kind of thing. And then, but short meditations, usually somewhere 10 minutes. I like Sam Harris's app on it's called Waking Up. It's a great app if anybody likes or interested in meditation. It's a great introduction. But what I tell my patients all the time and my clients is that, and this is a very simple Dzogchen practice, is that all you really have to do is start becoming more aware of what you're thinking and your emotions. And so even if you spend 30 seconds just watching your brain and just observing things arise and watching them pass away. And this is what I tell my kids all the time. I'm like, any emotion, feeling, thought, activity, situation, everything arises and everything passes away. Everything's impermanent. So if you meditate on that and just watch things arise, watch them pass away, like that's a great way to get started for most people. So that's a big part of what I do and what I teach my kids. And then on the technology side, I have my hyperbaric chamber, I have my sauna, I have my Peloton. And so those are things that I use very regularly for my own personal optimization strategies in my basement man cave that I have here in Colorado. So yeah.
Love that, dude. Last but not least, Dr. Scott Sherr, where can people find you, connect with you, or just learn more about Troscriptions?
So Troscriptions is on Instagram. It's probably the easiest place. It's at Troscriptions. It's the word troche and the word prescription mashed up into Troscriptions. It's because we use troches and we're as close to prescription grade as possible. And so Troscriptions.com is the website. My personal Instagram is at Dr. Scott Sherr, my name spelled out, DrScottSherr. There's also my website, drscottsherr.com, where you can find me. I do consulting for hyperbaric therapy, and I have a concierge wellness program that I work on with people that is based on the health optimization medicine framework. So those are the major places. We also have our nonprofit, which is Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. Homehope.org is the website there. So yeah, and it's been a pleasure, Joel. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and just good to see you and connect with you again.
Yeah, I look forward to the next time we see each other in person. I'll give you a blue tongue.
Let's go.
Blue is the new smart, as we say.